Dan Kamin, internationally known Pittsburgh-based performer.
I'm a Pittsburgher. I live here. I do shows in the public schools and private schools through an organization called Gateway to the Arts, a wonderful organization.
Yes, of course.
Occasionally I'll do first night performances. I just did one at the August Wilson Center a couple of years ago. But most of my shows are out of town. And so I'm a Pittsburgh guy who's exporting culture created in Pittsburgh to the rest of the world, and that's the greatest feeling in the world. Went to college here in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon, but midway through they showed a movie, a Charlie Chaplin movie, and I'd never seen a Charlie Chaplin movie. He was kind of persona non grata in America, in the America that I grew up in, because of the McCarthy era. He was really one of the victims of the McCarthy era, because he was very left-wing, he was politically activist. So I'd never seen one. And when they showed one of his best, The Gold Rush from 1925. And it was accompanied on the piano by one of my classmates, Stephen Schwartz, who your listeners may know from a couple of shows he wrote, like Godspell and Wicked. But in those days, I was hiring him for $25 to play movies for the film club, which I was running. And The Gold Rush, I don't remember his score, but I sure remember everything about the movie because it simply was the best movie I'd ever seen, and I wanted to know how I could become a part of that world, to start to pick apart what are these things that have made these films resonate with people. We're approaching the 100th anniversary of his first films, and even the first films still can make audiences laugh. And what was he onto? That's what I wrote books to find out for myself, and I found out for myself in the process of becoming a performer who had to make up my own comedy material and see what worked and see what didn't, and see the structures and study other people, you know. And so I've been a performer, but also I return to those films like you would return to a well and drink deeply of the source of your inspiration.
And one of the books, 1984, Charlie Chaplin's one-man show, correct? This actually led to you working on the Richard Attenborough film Chaplain.
Very directly. I had the publisher send it to Robert, to the production, and Richard Attenborough just handed it to Robert. So I wrote a book about the very technical aspects of Charlie Chaplin's films. What's he doing with his wrists and his shoulders? How are his gags put together? What are the common thing that links his gags together and his films together that give them that satisfying sense that you're not just seeing. You can look at any Chaplin film and feel that you're watching an epic that unfolds over all of his films, because it is like one big, long, continuing saga of that character. So I wrote a book guaranteed to sell maybe 4 copies, because who's going to read a book like that? But it got published, and one of the 4 people was Robert Downey, who, when he read it, it had just come out in paperback, and he called me right here in Pittsburgh and said, you know, I think you may be the only person who can help me pull this off, because it read like a training manual for him. I'm talking about what's he doing when he walks.
What was it like getting that call? Were you like, okay, come off it, who is this really? Or
it was a jaw-dropping moment. Within a couple of weeks, he flew to Pittsburgh, and I was doing a show down in Oakland at the time on behalf of the Three Rivers Shakespeare Festival, but it wasn't a Shakespeare show. It was my latest solo show. And Robert came to see it. First day he came in, and then we started the job of turning him into Charlie Chaplin. The first thing he said to me is, I want you to tell me how to hold my fork. It was a great privilege to, when I got out there, I found, of course, that there was nobody who knew anything about why they brought me about. You know, I figured there'd be, you know, I'd be just standing in line with a bunch of other people telling him to, coaching him to, you know, because there's all kinds of choreographers and but there's no name for what I did. That was one of the problems I had on that and other movies I did. There's fight choreographers, there's dance choreographers.
Chaplinologist?
There's no name for a physical comedy creator. There used to be a name in the silent film era. It was called Gag Man. You know.
That works.
Yeah.
Well, how are you listed in the credits of the film?
I believe it was a Chaplin choreography by me.
Very good.
Yeah, because I ended up not just training him to, we had a very interesting summit meeting at Robert's house where Richard Attenborough came for dinner along with his assistant and Robert and I, and that's when Robert introduced me to Richard Attenborough and told him he would like me to be hired. And I said, I had the temerity to say to Richard that I would have a problem coaching Robert to do the gags that are written into the script, because there are no gags written into the script. The comedy sequences were written by people who really didn't understand physical comedy and Chaplin's comedy. And Richard Attenborough didn't miss a beat. He said, "Of course, my dear boy, that's what you will help us with." And I ended up, in fact, creating several of the film's physical comedy sequences in Chaplin style, which is not something I would have chosen to do. I would have said, let's just do what he did. But it was a great privilege to, you know, after all Chaplin had given to me, to be able to return the favor by helping to shape the portrait of him a little bit in that film. And of course, Robert did such a wonderful job and was even nominated for an Oscar. So it was quite an amazing full circle in my life. Everybody behind the scenes you see was quite famous. The cinematographer of that movie was Ingmar Bergman's cinematographer. The guy who was the set designer did the Harry Potter sets a few years later. All these people were top of their field. And I was Mr. Nobody from nowhere, except that I happened to know this certain stuff about Charlie Chaplin, so I kind of was skipped to the head of the class, but I didn't have a department like they did. They all had their own trailers and departments and spaces to work, so I was hanging out with Robert in his trailer.
Did Robert Downey Jr. call you for Iron Man?
He did not. So even before the Chaplin movie came out, I was pulled into a meeting by the director, producer of the movie Benny and Joon, and eventually Johnny Depp came to the meeting as well. And sort of the same thing happened. I said, well, these gags in the film they're not gags, as the film was originally written. And they said, well, Mr. Smart Guy, what would you do? And it was actually my best moment in Hollywood, Brian, because I gave them what became the ending of the movie. And they all looked at each other. Depp wasn't in the room at that point. They all looked at each other and nodded and said, "You're hired." But it was very satisfying, and Depp was delightful to work with, as was Robert Downey.
Now, I read a story, and I wonder if this is true, that the coin trick he does in Pirates of the Caribbean, where he flips the coin through his fingers.
What happened at that first meeting was that Depp at that time was a chain smoker. And I took the cigarette out of his mouth and I pushed it up my nose. And he said, "Whoa, I have to learn how to do that." So your radio listeners aren't going to appreciate this, but I'm rolling the coin around my finger. And that's what I showed Johnny Depp and said, well, if you can learn to do this, then I'll show you anything you want. And 2 weeks later, when I was brought back out to begin rehearsing with him, he couldn't do it very well because this takes a long time to learn, but he could do it without just dropping it every time.
Well, did you start him on a big coin, a really big coin?
Yeah, it's very hard to do, because if you try with the other hand, you see it jumps back here, which is so annoying for the radio.
You got me. You got me.
Like the routine he does, where kids think Johnny Depp invented the roll thing, because I copped that. I invented everything that he does in that movie, just about, except for the dance of the two bread rolls, which of course I copped from that first Charlie Chaplin movie, bringing us neatly full circle in our interview.
Somehow or another, on Burgh Vivant, we always end up talking about nudity. In olden days, a glimpse of stocking was looked on as something shocking.
And in Miami was a very lively scene of magicians and criminals who hung out together. And so I was meeting people with names like Evil Eye Finkel. He was a real person.
I love it.
People who were card sharps, Damon Runyon-esque kind of creatures, kind of people. And you know, none of these guys wouldn't do magic tricks. They just would.
No, Evil Eye Finkel will cut you. That it's supposed to be a Martian in a robot suit or a Martian controlling a robot suit?
The Martian is inside, kind of the facade of a giant Barbie doll on steroids, yes. And Pittsburgh Symphony began hiring me. Can you do something to keep the kids' attention while we, playing our music? Because they climb in the walls.
You're not Fiddlesticks, are you?
I am not Fiddlesticks. They don't hire me anymore because they have Fiddlesticks. Oh. Fiddlesticks, got me out of a job.
To hell with that guy.
And when Marcel Marceau died just a few years ago, I heard one radio person say, "This is one box he's not going to get out of."